The seasons change, and so does the weather. And based on the latest forecast for this upcoming winter, it's expected to be colder and wetter compared to normal. And a large driver in this change is El Nino and its long-term impacts on the weather right here. So if you like cold and you like the rain, we have a lot to break down. Let's get right to it and talk about the big change that's expected this upcoming winter. From space, you can see just about everything. Large dynamic weather patterns that form clouds and rain around the globe, especially around the poles during the coldest time of year, winter. Meteorologists divide the seasons into 3 months. Winter includes December, January, and February. But why? It's an easier way to analyze weather data, such as temperature cycles throughout the year. But most recognize the start of winter on a specific day, the winter solstice, which is typically around December 21st every year. And the exact day is determined by the position of the planet as it revolves around the sun. One position per astronomical season: spring, summer, fall, and winter. However you look at it, winter is cold, and this season is expected to be a little different. Winter weather is influenced by numerous factors. Atmospheric forces you've probably heard of, like the upper-level jet stream and the phase of El Nino. And maybe some you're not so familiar with, like the polar vortex. With these forces working in tandem, our latest forecast begins with a moderate El Nino. And the last time it reached this level was winter 2016, bringing in the heaviest rains we've seen in a decade.
Usually an El Nino winter is wetter. That's one thing for sure. I think precipitation is probably easier than temperatures, but it should be a wetter December, January, February, and really I think all the way into spring.
El Nino begins with warm water in the Pacific Ocean. Warm rising air follows, creating clouds, rain, and more importantly, a teleconnection, where weather and climate in one part of the world has effects over long distances. A small shift in this pattern impacts weather everywhere, extending further into the atmosphere. During an El Nino, the position of the jet stream shifts. Well, not just one jet stream, but two. There are a couple we look at when forecasting. One is called the subtropical jet, which is lower in latitude, driving in moisture from the west or from the Pacific Ocean. Then the polar jet, which helps the cold winter air push farther south from the North Pole. But why is this important? This change in the jet streams helps determine where weather is more active, changing the location and intensity of storm systems. For example, the subtropical jet is expected to fall south during an El Nino, driving in moisture and rain to the southern tier of the United States. Historical data shows these changes when compared to an average winter. Here's a look at the 2015-2016 annual rainfall, the last time we transitioned into a strong El Nino. Cities like San Antonio, Dallas, New Orleans, Orlando, and parts of the Carolinas all observed a surplus in rainfall. Although not everywhere saw intense rains, most did, showcasing one effect of El Nino. Because of this and several other trends in the past, this upcoming winter is expected to be wetter and cooler compared to a normal winter.
So in the winter, of course, it's going to get cold across the northern part of the country. And really what creates the jet stream is the difference between cold and warm. So if you've got waters in the equatorial Pacific, if it gets warmer than normal, then you're going to really zip that jet stream and make it stronger. And so not only is it a little further south, but also stronger. And so you'll have more storm systems that tend to come across Texas, more energized, with that jet stream, more lift. That all means more precipitation.
Now, the last thing that some hear during the winter is the Arctic Oscillation, or as most call it, the polar vortex.
And then once you get to the polar areas, there's a big low up there that just kind of spins semi-permanently, and that's what we call the polar vortex. And so most of the time it's pretty stable, keeps the cold air up north, but every once in a while the pattern becomes very unstable, and then warmer air will intrude into the northern portions, northern climes, and therefore, to even things out, colder air plunges southward. And so that polar vortex is that semi-permanent area of really frigid air that stays up there near the pole.
The polar vortex is responsible for dislodging the air from the North Pole and pushing it farther south. This Arctic oscillation has two phases, positive and negative. When it's positive, polar air is bottled up within the North Pole, and the jet stream doesn't move as often. Once it phases into negative, the jet stream is fluid, helping to transport colder air to the lower latitudes, closer to southern Canada and the United States. Usually when this happens, the Midwest experiences sub-zero temperatures, with wind chills below -40. For Texas, if the polar vortex moves farther south, it'll usually mean temperatures in the teens and 20s, depending on the local forecast.
So bundle up and have an umbrella at arm's reach because this upcoming winter is expected to be wet and cold, which is good news because most of the South still suffers from extreme drought. For more on the weather and the winter outlook, head over to kens5.com. For now, I'm meteorologist Ryan Shoptaw.